Hello and welcome to episode 13 in this series on ChessTDD. As always, I'm going to get started here by amending the spreadsheet to account for getting rid of the things that I've done in the past and adding new things that I want to do. So before I had kind of made a decent attempt, I guess, in the end at refactoring this method. It didn't quite get as nice as I would have liked to see, but it was better than a whole series of redundant calls. So I guess I'll consider that half done, and I'll put the other half as a yellow item. And then when I'm done screwing around with Excel formatting, what I'm going to do is start defining where I want to go next with this series, which is now that all the moves have done, I've kind of got to break out of this rut here and start putting it all together in the form of the board. So each of the pieces right now returns a theoretical set of all of the moves that they could go to, but we need something in place to restrict the piece's movement based on the presence of other pieces, like where they can't jump, the idea of capturing that sort of thing. So I'm going to start with this board class. And the other thing I'm going to do here that's of particular note that I mentioned in the introduction on the blog post is I'm going to start adopting a testing pattern that I picked up from Steve Smith in a comment on a recent blog post of mine, where I'm going to start giving the test classes different names that include the context in which the given of given when then is set up. So this seemed like a particularly good place to introduce it, because what I'm about to do is implement a method, get moves from, I think I call it, also on board. So basically the board class is going to let you specify a square, presumably that'll have a piece, and I guess if it doesn't, we'll have to implement some error handling, but you specify a square, and then it's going to tell you what moves are available from that square, both from the pieces perspective and then from a legality perspective, which we haven't done yet. So that's going to be the crux here. So what I'm doing is, to get the ball rolling, I'm saying board get moves from given normal chessboard setup should. This idea of specifying the object or the class that's under test, as well as the context and then should, is the new technique I've picked up and I'm trying out. You can read back a couple of posts ago on my blog to see kind of the logic behind that, and in the text of this post I give a link to the to Steve's actual write-up on it, so you can kind of see more detail on how this works. But I was really intrigued by this idea, so I want to try it out. And this is an ideal setting for it, because what I'm going to do is, I'm starting this off here, I'm going to write a whole series of tests that assume that there's a chessboard with all the pieces added to it in the starting position. So what a great spot to, you have sort of a complicated setup and then something with that complicated setup where you're going to write a lot of tests. So I'll give this its own class and try this out and see how it goes. What you can see me doing here is struggling to recall if in C# underscores were legal in class names. Turns out they are. I figured they were, but strange things were happening, I remember, as I wrote this. So you learn something new every day, or at least relearn something you used to know. So with the naming in place, the idea here is now I'm going to continue to follow my habit of defining the test all inline in the first method first, or I should say the setup all inline in the first test method that I write. And then later, once it's green, I'll probably start pulling some of this stuff out and refactoring. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to define the method signature for this method that board doesn't have on it yet. Then I'm going to go and declare the method. And it gives me object as the return type, which I'll get to in a minute. And I'm going to try to give this a good name here. I don't know if I'm in love with target coordinate, but so far so good, I suppose. Get rid of this throws so that it's not failing. And now we can go about defining the setup here. And as I get into this setup, you're going to see me struggle a bit with why can't I think of the name of this? When the array indexed, it's array indexing at 0 or 1, where I had kind of started out just using arrays way back in the early days. And keep in mind, I think it's probably been 3 months or something since I've looked at this board class. So I initially started out with zero indexing, and then I kind of liked the semantics of the one indexing for all these different pieces. And now I'm realizing, or I will shortly when I'm stumped by non-compiling, I'm realizing that I will have to contend with a place where there's zero indexing versus one indexing. But for now, what I've done is a whole bunch of copy and paste, and then I got halfway through it and decided that this was kind of embarrassing. So instead of even getting in there in the first place, I'm going to do a little bit of refactoring up front. It's kind of iffy whether I should do this or not, given the context of test-driven development. I mean, all this redundant adding of pawns is explicit and clear, and one might argue that I should just do it that way and then refactor it later. But at the same time, the fact that I can hit Shift-Enter or whatever I was doing to copy and paste doesn't alter the fact that I'm copying and pasting and taking shortcuts. So I either ought to hand type all those out or I ought to do it right the first time. So I'm going to try to do it right the first time here. And if memory serves, I'm going to struggle a bit because of the indexing consideration that I mentioned, or index out of bounds. Now, keep in mind, at this point, I hadn't looked at this board class in months, as I said, so it's telling me index was outside of the bounds of the array, and I was sitting here as I was coding this thinking, what array? What are you even talking about? I had sort of actually forgotten that I was using that two-dimensional array data structure in the board class, so I think if that I was starting to wonder if I was, doing something wrong in enumerable range, so as a troubleshooting mechanism, especially with something like off by one, maybe I'll change one of the parameters in here and see if this goes green, because this isn't even a failing assertion. This is like something that's not compiling. So I did a debug, and I was looking to see, is there anything clearly wrong here? I've got all the coordinates I would have expected from this enumerable range. Then that helped a bit running the tests. I see, oh, okay, there is an array, and that's probably the array they're talking about. So what am I going to do now? I am running outside of the bounds of that array. Looking up, I can see that, the index bound of this array is 8. I also see that I have this default board size that's not being used. Probably do something about that. But so the problem becomes apparent to me, and I'm going to pop over to my spreadsheet fairly soon. I'm sitting here kind of thinking about, well, what should I do? So does this solve the problem moving to 0, 7? Obviously it doesn't, because there's a, let's see, I think board coordinate doesn't like that. So this is where I'm hitting this. There we go. If I go from 1 to 7, that's not enough, but I'm not getting errors anymore. So at this point in coding, I figured out what the problem is, and I think I go over to my trusty spreadsheet and say, I'm going to need to do something about this 0 versus 1 indexed array concept. As I was writing this, I wasn't quite sure how extensive this was in the code, but then I remembered that it was just this board piece. Everywhere else I was doing 1. So I've got my pawns, not quite as many of them, I think, as I might like. So I'll move on. And I was moving on for the specific purpose of seeing, I'm going to actually set up a chessboard and see if I run out of real estate somewhere in the middle. So let me put the rook at either end. So I'm going to duplicate this once things look good and say I'm going to have a rook at 1, 1 and at 1, 8. Or 8, 1, I should say. So there, or 7, 1. There are my two rooks. And if I had stopped and thought about it a bit, I would have realized that I was going to run out of real estate, but I figured I'd just, I was going to have to set up the board anyway. So I'm going to work my way from the edges to the inside. So the knight's going to go at 2, 1 and 6, 1. And then I'll move on to bishop at 3, 1 and 5, 1. And then at that point, I'll realize that I can't put the king and the queen on the same square. So it's probably about time to do something about the indexing. And what I'll try is pretty straightforward. I think the first thing I thought to try was to go over here and change the upper bounds. But then I realized this was the only, the board class was the only place I was using this data structure, if memory serves. So rather than changing, I personally, I don't know if it's for my C days or what, but to me arrays are always 0 indexed. So instead of trying to change that somehow, I figured I would just account for it in, yeah, so I started doing this and then realized, I don't like this. The coordinates that were being passed in, I would use -1 to offset them there instead. And that's where I had that moment of figuring out that I wanted to do that. So here it should be all good, right? Now I can't figure out why things are still failing. Oh, wait a minute. There is another index of the array, and I probably should take care of it there too. Once I do this, I believe everything goes green, so I sort of tentatively decide to move on. I'll probably, my reasoning here is that as I actually start to implement the chess game in earnest, if I have off by 1 problems and whatnot, they'll get fleshed out. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that as green and just figure it is until I hit some other problem somewhere else with my TDD, or else when the TDD is over and I've got the initial implementation and I start writing integration and edge case type tests. I figure sooner or later I'll see a problem. I don't see one now. Things seem good. So I'm going to go forward with the implementation and just take that on faith for the moment. Well, not exactly faith. I have a pretty decent unit test suite backing it. So now I'll put the white queen on the 4th spot and the white king on the 5th spot. I should also note here, at the moment, I have not defined the opponent side of the board, the black side of the board at all, because I don't need it yet, so why do it? But sooner or later, I'm going to have a mirror set up on the other side of the board, just not doing it here so far. Now, this test is green. I'm not asserting anything. And I'm trying to remember if I do an assertion here and then refactor. I believe that's what happened. I could refactor with this test being green. Things are happening even though there's no assert, so as long as things stay green, that's okay. But I kind of want to get to the point here, and I want to say let's assert that when I get from the board, I pass it 1-2, which is the location of the pawn on the left-hand side of the board as I'm looking at it. And I want to assert that that pawn can move ahead. Now, at this point, I did a tiny bit of yak shaving where, well, first I had to make the return type line up so it compiled. But then I kind of decided I just had enough with this whole concept of dot any and then the 2 conditions of the board coordinate where, you know, X is this and Y is this. I said enough is enough. I've been procrastinating about that for probably 6 episodes. Had various conversations on the blog about it. Why didn't I use the C# point class? The answer to that was because I wasn't really familiar with it, but still not necessarily enamored of it. Why didn't I use the built-in equals method? Long story short, didn't know how default equals would behave on this structure. I suppose I could, but what I wound up doing was sort of stumbling onto a semantic way of expressing this that I liked. Not sure it's the greatest, but it keeps things brief, so you're going to get to see that here in a second once I do this refactoring. This is where, so I've got a passing test now, and what you've seen me do in the past is kind of write 2 tests, and then after a 3rd factor to the test init logic. I got to be honest with you, I had no interest in writing all this crap again, so I'm pulling this all up to a test init so that I can just say, get the moves from this coordinate, and then I'm going to make an assertion about what those contain, and that's all I want to do from here on in. So I'm pulling that right on up, and since I've got all green, no problem with that whatsoever. And this goes along with the whole idea that I learned from Steve here about the context of the class. I mean, this is the context. I'm building the chessboard. It's right there in the name of the class, so good a time as any to put it into the initialize method and get our context defined so that the class's name actually makes sense. So now I'm going to write my second method here, and I guess when I was coding this yesterday, thinking back on it, the yak shaving came later than I recalled, but I do it, I promise. So right here, I'm pretty excited about this point in the test-driven development, because now I can start saying, okay, I've got a chessboard what should be legal. Now it's not really abstract or low level anymore. I'm actually thinking of a chessboard. I'm thinking of my domain, and I'm writing BDD style tests to say, hey, if I've got a chessboard, I should be able to move a pawn. It should be legal. I should get this move that's 2 spaces ahead because it's the pawn's first move. So I'm asserting that we have this move in here. And then I was trying out the suggestion that I had gotten about using equals. That was my first thought. Let's start doing that. That comment was spot on. I could use equals now that I know how the default structure equal paradigm works. But then I did it, and I don't really like this. I don't want to have to instantiate a new board coordinate. It's just a matter of personal taste, but that seems really weird to say, I've got this board coordinate and it equals, and then I create a new one. So what I decided to do was... and I'm going to comment this out because I don't want to, because I want to make sure I stay green. Actually, I don't remember why I commented that out. I guess it doesn't really matter. But this is where I got off on my yak shaving tangent here, and I just don't like these semantics. I just want to say is true moves.any and then something pretty straightforward. So what I settled on, your mileage may vary in terms of your opinion on these semantics. I kind of like it as, I'm going to define this matches as a method on board coordinate, and I'm going to pass it 2 ins. And I feel a little almost hypocritical because I had talked early on a lot about getting away from primitive obsession and defining types to represent your domain concepts. So I'm going against that maybe a little bit, but I just really like the way this reads in all the tests, and I don't see any problem giving board coordinate this functionality to see if it matches an XY pair. For all I know, I may change my mind about that in a few days or something, but for now, I find that it's making the asserts look nicer, more readable. It's getting rid of this ceremony of new board coordinate or these conditional matches, or I'm sorry, conditional equality things. So I'm going to count this sort of done. I'm not doing the refactor, so I'm going to split this up. It's not an equals method, but it's something. And, you know, if you were to watch me do this, this is sort of typical of how this spreadsheet goes. I'm sort of redefining my goals as I go. So I'm going to, just for clarity, in demonstrating this on YouTube here, I'm going to, define what I actually did so you don't think that I thought that I had implemented equals or something. So, hey, there we go. And I'm going to save that as a to-do item for later, that refactoring and all these other classes. And I think the semantics of this are nicer. Is there any move that matches 1-3 as its coordinates? I'm happy. And I'm going to be writing a whole lot of tests in upcoming episodes in this test class, so I want these kind of brief semantics. So all that yak shaving aside, now it's time to actually make this test pass, and I reason that the easiest way to do this is to get rid of the obtuse hard coding. And I don't remember what I had done with pawn exactly. I think that pawn is going to have both of these moves defined in it, assuming that has moved is false. So I'm going to actually get the piece that's at this location, and why I didn't use get piece, I don't know now. Well, there's a refactoring for next time. So I'm going to obtain this piece, and then I'm going to return the moves from this coordinate for that piece. And I think, yep, that makes everything green. Now at this point I realized I was a bit low on time, so it's time to pop back over to the spreadsheet and sort of reconcile where things are now. And let's see, what did I do here? I can see from my timeline on the video that I'm wrapping up. I think I defined something else that I wanted to do, but not sure off the top. Either way, this is a... Oh, there we go. I'm going to sorry, I should know this. Okay, so the moves, or the method, nominally works. Next time around, I'm going to start really kind of fleshing out this method and defining all the legal things that can be done. And this is going to include, yeah, here we go, restricting moves that are blocked by another piece, for instance. That's something we really need to get to next time. So until then, have a good one.